Hey everybody, my name is Pat McCann. I'm an analyst here with Noble Capital Markets. Today we have Lisata, and if we have time at the end of the presentation, we can go over some Q&A. Before I hand it over to David, just wanted to let you know if you do have questions, feel free to submit them along the way, and we can let them build up and touch on as many of them as we can at the end. So with that, David, over to you.
Thank you, Pat. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to listen to me introduce you to Lisata Therapeutics. As all other public companies, we'll be making some forward-looking statements during the course of this presentation, and I'll ask that you please keep those in mind as you make investment decisions. I'd like to start with an overview of Lisata and really maybe give you an opportunity to understand how we differentiate ourselves from the rest of the pack of small biopharma or biotech companies that are, sub $100 million market caps. We are a clinical stage therapeutics development company working in the area of oncology, and we're developing a novel targeting and penetration technology to improve the efficacy of anti-cancer drugs. Like many other companies, most of our staff comes out of big pharma. We have a seasoned management team with almost a century of drug development experience, providing approvals for products in oncology and other therapeutic areas around the world. We have intellectual property protecting our technology, but I think the next three bullet points are probably the most salient for investors today. First, we have multiple projected product and business milestones over the next 12 to 24 months, all of which should be value creating and will provide for a steady news flow and a crescendo, if you will, of information and awareness culminating sometime toward the end of this year with the announcement of our phase 2b data in pancreatic cancer. We also have a platform technology that we believe has been validated in inverted commas by existing partnerships, all of whom have done extensive due diligence and have agreed with the potential for our platform to provide significant benefit in solid tumor treatments. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, in today's very difficult financing environment, Lisata has been a very good steward of its capital, and we still have projected cash running into 2026. So it's about 2 years of cash on our balance sheet, funding all of our development programs through to data with no debt on our balance sheet whatsoever. So we're focused on solid tumor cancers, and I think most people understand that cancer remains the #1 cause of death amongst the population of the world. But I think what they don't understand is that more than 90% of newly reported cancers are in fact solid tumor cancers. And these are the cancers that people dread hearing because the prognosis for people with these cancers is actually quite dire. And the reason is that solid tumor treatments are suboptimal. And that's because there is a morphology associated with a solid tumor that makes it very difficult to treat and very different from treating other disease types. Specifically, the tumor surrounds itself with a mixture of tumor endothelial, fibroblastic, and other types of cells, creating a membrane called a stroma, which acts as a barrier to prevent the infiltration of anti-cancer drugs. In addition, the tumor microenvironment, that is the area immediately adjacent to the tumor, is immunosuppressive. So that prevents your immune system from being maximally effective and actually also mitigates the effectiveness of immunotherapies that are administered systemically. This tumor microenvironment also contributes to tumor resistance broadly and actually contributes to the spread of these solid tumors through tumor metastases. And you can't address this by a brute force method, either prolonged or escalated dosing of non-targeted anti-cancer therapies, because that leads to intolerable off-target side effects. And so this challenge here is, how do you find a way to target the tumor and penetrate the tumor while not exacerbating adverse events? And we've found the answer to this based on work that was done at the Scripps Institute that was now exclusively licensed to Lisata, using something called internalizing RGD peptides. Now, for a long time, people have known that RGD peptides are good tumor targeting agents, but they do nothing to enhance the penetration of the stroma. Internalizing RGDs actually combine targeting and penetration enhancement. In our lead program, LSTA1 or certepetide, is an internalizing RGD that also then triggers an active transport mechanism called the C-end rule active transport mechanism, which allows for selective enhancement of delivery of anti-cancer agents into solid tumors. And our product is now in mid to late stage clinical development as a treatment for solid tumors. What's really promising about LSTA1 is that it converts the tumor stroma from a barrier to a conduit for anti-cancer drugs, and I'll explain how that works in just a moment. Additionally, it combats resistance and metastases, and this is really important because LSTA1 depletes the immunosuppressive cells in the tumor microenvironment, enhances the cytotoxic T cells, those cells that attack the tumors, and inhibits the metastatic cascade. And it is agnostic to the modality of the companion anti-cancer agents with which it is used. So we can co-administer LSTA1 with chemotherapy, radiotherapy, immunotherapy, antisense or sRNA therapy, etc., and still expect to see an improvement in efficacy of those therapies in the presence of LSTA1. So as a result, we're developing the product and the platform based on a two-pillar strategy, being cognizant of the fact that pancreatic and other advanced solid tumors will become the more common causes of cancer mortality in the coming decade. And because these tumors still have a very poor prognosis for those who are diagnosed with them. So on the one hand, we're pursuing a rapid global registration in pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, or PDAC, initially combined with gemcitabine and nab-paclitaxel standard of care. And in this side of the house, we have already completed a large phase 2b trial, 158 patients, double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized, and powered. And that is expected to read out top-line data by the end of this year, which will be seminal for the company. And in parallel, we're running a host of other trials demonstrating the effectiveness of LSTA1 when combined with a variety of different standard of care regimens in a variety of different solid tumor types. And you'll see the list of trials that are ongoing, all of which are also expected to have data sometime between the second half of this year and the end of next year. I mentioned earlier that we have a number of partnerships. I think the development alliances are important because they contribute resources, people, and money without taking any commercial interest in our product. The strategic commercial alliance is important with China because China is a very specific regulatory environment, and you really need a Chinese partner to exploit that appropriately. Qilu is a very successful large pharmaceutical company in China who has exclusive rights now to LSTA1. They're developing our product at their cost in China based on the direction of a joint steering committee on which we sit. And we have a very, I think, lucrative contract with them. We've already collected about $15 million in milestones, and the opportunity exists for another approximately $200 million in development, regulatory, and eventually commercial milestones over the course of the life of this arrangement. But importantly, as you saw earlier, because LSTA1 is agnostic to the modality of the drugs with which we combine it, there's a plethora of additional partnership opportunities available by indication, by modality of co-administered drugs, and/or by geography. So this actually represents a very large and attractive commercial opportunity. The way that LSTA1 works is actually quite elegant. It's based on the fact that tumor cells, tumor endothelial cells, the cells that form the stroma and the tumor, are all have upregulated receptors on their surface called alpha V, beta 3, and beta 5 receptors. And LSTA1, which is a 9 amino acid cyclic peptide, has a high binding affinity and specificity for these integrins. And once bound to these integrins, LSTA1 is subjected to proteolytic cleavage based upon proteases, which exist in the tumor microenvironment, and that produces a linear C-end rule fragment, or CendR fragment, which has a very high binding affinity and specificity for an adjacent receptor called neuropilin-1. And once neuropilin-1 is activated, it actuates the CendR transport mechanism, and that's manifested by the formation of microvesicles on the surface of the cells, which encapsulate co-administered drugs. and percolate or ferry them through the stroma, depositing their payload deep into the tumor. In addition, the send-or transport mechanism activation relaxes the gap junctions on the stroma and the tumor, which also allows for greater infiltration of immune cells into the tumor. A few slides here just to demonstrate how specific and how effective this particular mechanism is. Here's an experiment where we used fluorescent quantum dots as the combined entity dosed with and without LSTA1. And when you dose a mouse with a tumor model with fluorescent quantum dots and you apply an etching solution, all of the fluorescent quantum dots in circulation are quenched and the mouse is dark under an excitation source, as you see in the left panel. But if you add LSTA1 to the experiment, you can see that all of the quantum dots are driven into the tumor because that's where all the fluorescence lies. And that shows, I think, very nicely the targeted tumor penetration that is afforded by the presence of LSTA1. And then we have here a sampling of more than 350 scientific publications that show improved survival, improved effectiveness of anti-cancer agents when combined with LSTA1 in almost any validated solid tumor model. I think that's very important. But what's really important is what translates into people. And here are the results from our phase 1b/2a trial, which were published in the Lancet in 2022, actually. This is from 31 patients who were first-line metastatic pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma patients from a multi-center study done in Australia. On the safety side, LSTA1 was well tolerated. There were no dose-limiting toxicity, and the safety of LSTA1 plus standard of care was consistent with that of standard of care alone, meaning there was no exacerbation of adverse events due to the presence of LSTA1. But what there was a significant augmentation in efficacy of that standard of care regimen. And that's more easily seen graphically here with a 55% improvement in median overall survival and a 76% improvement in median progression-free survival, as well as a consistent improvement across all other measured endpoints in the trial in the presence of LSTA1. This also led us to doing some further exploration in other cancers. And here are the results summarized from a case report that was published earlier this year, showing that a patient who had metastatic gastroesophageal adenocarcinoma, who was undergoing the typical standard of care treatment of radiotherapy, FOLFIRINOX chemotherapy, and pembrolizumab immunotherapy, was still not seeing anything more than a partial response. But upon the addition of LSTA1, and after several cycles, that patient experienced a complete response. They are cancer-free and they remain in remission. So even though this is a single patient experiment, I think it contributes to the overall hypothesis that the presence of LSTA1 will improve the effectiveness of any anti-cancer regime without causing undue additional side effects. The regulatory agencies agree with us on the potential of this. We've received fast track designation in the United States for pancreatic cancer, orphan drug designation in the US and Europe for pancreatic cancer, as well as orphan drug designation for glioblastoma or brain cancer and osteosarcoma in the United States, as well as a rare pediatric disease designation in osteosarcoma here in the United States. And these are more than just regulatory gold stars. All of these carry specific benefits, such as eligibility for accelerated approval, priority review, rolling review. In the case of the orphan designations, prolonged exclusivity on the market. And in the case of the rare pediatric disease designation, the opportunity to ultimately gain a rare pediatric review voucher, which actually has a commercial value and can be sold for upwards of $100 or more millions of dollars. The next two slides simply list all the ongoing trials that we have, with the top line being the phase 2b trial that I referenced earlier. We also have a trial in first-line cholangiocarcinoma, which we originally projected to enroll by the end of this year. Enrollment is going exceedingly well, however. There's a great deal of enthusiasm of the potential of the product. As a result, we expect to have that trial enrolled significantly sooner than the end of this year, and that means that data will be pulled forward into the earlier part of 2025 for the bolster trial as well. It's also led us to the consideration of starting a trial in second-line cholangiocarcinoma, which we hope to announce later this year. We have trials running with FOLFIRINOX in immunotherapy, as well as gemcitabine and immunotherapy in a variety of different cancers. And you can see that the phase 1b/2a trial for our partner in China, Qilu, is completed. They've announced that those results are corroborative of the results we found in Australia, and they've actually already started dosing their phase 2 trial as a result. We have a trial running in glioblastoma in combination with standard of care temozolomide, and also a trial in peritoneal carcinomatosis, which is running at the University of California, San Diego at this time. With additional trials in gastroesophageal adenocarcinoma, as well as a few other cancers that are being explored. And many of these trials are hoped to be funded by grant monies that we will get from foundations and/or government money to protect us from going through further dilutive funding. So our development milestones are laid out graphically on the next two slides. The round circles are execution milestones. The stars are data milestones. You can see that from this slide, throughout the remainder of this year and throughout next year, you will have lots of news flow based on the clinical portfolio. What's not shown here, because it's more difficult to predict from a timing perspective, are regulatory and business development milestones. But one could expect that positive cohort A top-line data from Ascend could also trigger several transactions in licensing associated with partnerships for LSTA1. And I should also mention that we've already had a discussion with the Australian authorities, who have agreed that they will accept an accelerated approval application for LSTA1 in pancreatic cancer based upon the phase 2b data. And we'll be having similar conversations with the EMA and the FDA throughout the course of the remainder of this year, which could put us in a position to have a commercialization effort, that is a registration effort, ongoing during the course of 2025 for certain jurisdictions, in combination with the phase 3 trials, which would be required for confirmatory purposes anyway in the event of a conditional approval. So lots of very good things projected to happen over the course of the next 2 years, and we would hope that that would bring significant value creation for our shareholders. I mentioned briefly our cash situation remains stable. We reported more than $50 million in cash at the end of last year. We have cash projected into 2026, so approximately 2 years of cash on our balance sheet, no debt, and a relatively clean cap table, which I think also helps to improve the attractiveness of Lisata as an investment opportunity. So based on a strong people experience and expertise, a protected technology, value-creating milestones, a stable financial position, and already existing partnerships with the possibility for many more, we would characterize ourselves as highly differentiated and attractive opportunity for investment. I will also add that for anyone who's taking a look at our stock, you see we trade relatively thinly. And of course, like many other stocks, we're trading below cash at this point in time, which is completely inconsistent with the progress we've made and the state of development and our financial situation. I will point out that our low trading volume is due mostly to the fact that we have somewhere between 60 and 65% of our shares held very closely by investors, either large net worth individuals, family offices, or institutional funds, who are long only and who are not trading on the open market. They're holding for the long-term upside that they see in Lisata. The rest of our shares are held by retail shareholders, many of whom hold small shares and trade intermittently. So you see a relatively low volume. So we behave much like a private company that's publicly listed, but that doesn't mitigate the large, I would say, upside that's possible based upon the positive news flow that's expected over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. So with that, I will end. I apologize for going so fast, but I did want to leave some time for questions. And I will also mention that on our website, you will find this particular presentation and this appendix. And in the appendix, excuse me for flashing forward, but you'll see for each trial, there is a great deal of additional information for those of you who are interested in further details. So with that, I will stop, come back to live conversation, and see if we can answer a few questions from the audience. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks, David. Very interesting presentation. Since we do have a few minutes, let me ask some of the questions we're compiling here. First of all, how would you define the competitive landscape?
So the competitive landscape is quite interesting. First and foremost, and I don't mean to be sort of tongue in cheek with this, but there is no competitive landscape, and that's because LSTA1 is designed to be used in combination with other products. So we're complementary. So I would characterize the landscape as a complementary landscape. We would not be marketed as a monotherapy, but we would be marketed to be used in combination with any other anti-cancer drug that has been approved. So I think the opportunity there is quite broad and quite large. And without taking a lot of time, I would ask people to look, historically at what I would call as an analog from a commercial perspective. That would be a compound called Zetia, which was a cholesterol absorption inhibitor, which was developed in combination with all different statins because it had a synergistic effect with those, and then ultimately was marketed to be combined with any statin that was approved, and then ultimately led to the buyout of Schering-Plough by Merck, who wanted to have exclusive rights to that product. But it's a similar approach, even though it's a different therapeutic area.
Understood. The next question is, how do you decide on what other tumor types in which to study LSTA1?
It's actually quite a simple decision tree. First and foremost, the tumor has to have a well-characterized stroma, because that's the basis for our mechanism of action. That's most solid tumors. The next criteria is that the available therapies are considered not to provide optimal results. And that's also possible for most solid tumors today. And then it's a question of being able to determine which tumor types have endpoints that we can get to in a reasonable period of time and in a reasonable cost for a company of our size initially, with the idea that the bigger studies and the more expensive studies in other tumors will come as we generate positive results in the smaller indications initially.
And then you also mentioned your cash balance. How should investors view your burn and your just the next year, 2 years, et cetera, as far as your funding goes?
Well, we're not officially raising money. I mean, that means we're not actually out on the road asking for a specific amount. But like all small companies of our size, we're always willing to entertain offers of capital. For that reason, we have an active ATM, and we're capable of and interested in doing pipes. But really, what we're trying to do right now is raise awareness, encourage people by whatever means they feel comfortable to take a position now in Lisata in anticipation of value creation going forward. As I said, we have about 2 years of cash on the balance sheet. With data coming out at the end of this year, we'll have that important data with still about a year's of cash on the balance sheet, giving us plenty of time to react appropriately. Part of that time will be used to see if we can consummate some of the business transactions that are sitting in the wings waiting for that data. And that could mitigate or even eliminate the need for future fundraising. But one way or the other, I think we'll be able to manage our capital very carefully, because a number of the other activities that we plan to do are going to be based on the availability of additional non-dilutive funding. We've been very good at collecting grant money and other non-dilutive funding from government agencies, and we'll continue to explore those as well.
Great. And then we have another question, which I think touches on the key milestone slide. But with data coming from the phase 2 Ascend trial in Australia, what opportunities will positive data present for the company?
Well, let me reiterate those. So positive Ascend data will do a number of things. First, and not in any order of priority, but as I mentioned just a moment ago, We have a number of large companies who are very interested in the technology and are just waiting to see the controlled data coming out of Ascend. So positive data from Ascend is likely to catalyze the consummation of any one of a number of business transactions, non-exclusive licenses for the company. Positive data from Ascend will trigger the accelerated approval application for the product in Australia, which could lead to commercialization as early as the end of 25 or early 26 in that jurisdiction, as well as the finalization of those types of discussions with EMA and FDA. Positive Ascend data will also allow us to determine the exact size and duration and therefore cost of the phase 3 trial that will be necessary to achieve registration in those jurisdictions where we don't have eligibility for accelerated approval, or to complete the confirmatory trials, which are always required when you do get conditional approval. And so we'll be able to do all that. So really, it's a trigger for many, many very important and value-creating catalysts for the company.
And then I think we are running low on time, but I think we have time for one more question. Touching on something you mentioned in the presentation, but on positive data from LSTA1, how would you look to partner it, and would you look to make it an exclusive deal? What's your viewpoint on that?
So our initial going in strategy is that we'll do as many non-exclusive deals as the market will bear, based on indication, combination, modality, and geography. So we think there's a greater, actually quite a large, much greater commercial opportunity by doing different non-exclusive licenses. But of course, if a company wants to either work in all of those cancers or take a defensive position and essentially prevent others from combining with us, for the appropriate offer, we would consider doing a single exclusive license as well. It's all going to be determined by what represents the best economics for our shareholders in the long run.
Great. Well, I think we are up against it. So I just want to thank all the attendees for being here. And thank you, David, for joining us. We really loved having you.
Thank you, Pat. Everyone, thanks for your attention. Have a great afternoon.